When we think of legends, our minds usually jump to some big, spooky old castle, or maybe a forgotten graveyard. But what's really terrifying is when a horrifying story isn't tied to a place, but to an object, something small, something you could just pick up.
And that brings us to this, a simple paper lantern. Looks pretty harmless, right? Maybe a little old, a bit dusty, but this very object is at the dead center of a Japanese urban legend. A legend about something that promises to give you light, but all it really delivers is death.
So here's the question that sits at the heart of this whole thing. This is the exact terrifying situation that a 25-year-old named Samir found himself in. He'd just moved from the US to Tokyo, living in a cool little house right on the edge of a forest. He was loving his new life, totally clueless that one night, his simple search for a little bit of light was about to drag him into total darkness. It all kicked off on what should have been a totally normal evening. Samir was walking home, ready to grab some dinner from his favorite spot, a noodle bar run by a guy named Mr. Tanaka. But as he got closer, he heard shouting. He saw Mr. Tanaka held at gunpoint, and before he could even think to call for help, a gunshot echoed through the night. It all happened so fast. In the shock, Samir dropped his phone and it just shattered on the pavement. The killer, stuffing cash into a bag, spun around, and their eyes met. Samir knew he had one option: run. He couldn't lead the murderer to his home, so he just bolted, plunging straight into the forest next to the road, crashing through the trees, getting more and more lost with every step. He eventually stumbled upon this old, broken-down house deep in the woods. He hid inside just as police sirens started screaming in the distance, and thankfully, it spooked the killer, who took off. For just a second, he must have felt this wave of relief, but then a new, horrible reality crashed down on him. The sirens faded. He was alone. His phone was busted, and he was lost in the pitch-black darkness of the forest. Totally desperate, Samir started fumbling around for his box of matches. He struck his very last one. And in that tiny flickering flame, his eyes landed on something. Tucked away in a dark corner of this abandoned house was an old, white paper lantern. Hope. He thought he'd found a way to light his path back home. So he grabs it, and with a last bit of flame from that match, he lights the candle inside. I mean, you can just imagine the relief he must have felt in that moment. He thinks he's found his guiding light. He has absolutely no idea that what he's actually just done is light a predator's lure. The instant that lantern was lit, the forest outside just exploded with noise. The trees started shaking like they were in a hurricane. He could hear monkeys and hyenas screaming out in the dark. Then, smash, a window in the old house shatters. And that's when Samir saw it on the wall. The lantern was casting a shadow. But it wasn't his shadow. It was the silhouette of a woman, and it was moving towards him. He bolted from the house, lantern still in hand, just stumbling blindly through the forest. He ran until he just couldn't anymore. Totally exhausted, he slumped against a big tree, putting the lantern down on the ground next to him. He closed his eyes for just a second, and that's when the real nightmare began. He suddenly felt this cold, tight grip around his body. He snapped his eyes open and saw two decaying, rotting hands reaching right out of the paper of the lantern, wrapping around him. And he could clearly see deep, jagged cuts all over those hands, like they'd been slashed with a knife. He started to struggle, kicking, trying to break free. His hand brushed against a heavy piece of wood on the forest floor. He wrenched himself away, and without thinking, he just brought that wood down as hard as he could on the lantern, smashing it. And just to be sure, he stomped on the pieces until the light was completely gone. And the forest went silent again. Dark. And then the light came back. The shattered pieces of the lantern began to glow, pulling themselves back together. But it wasn't the same. As it reformed, a grotesque mouth split open on its paper surface, and this long, sharp, red tongue snaked its way out. Okay, so this was clearly no ordinary lantern. This was something ancient, something from Japanese folklore known as a yokai, one of the countless supernatural monsters and spirits. What Samir had stumbled upon, what was now hunting him, was a bekechochin, the ghost lantern. The lantern's tongue shot out and wrapped around Samir's legs, tripping him. And then a full figure began to emerge from its light. It was the woman from the shadow. Her body was covered in rotting knife wounds, her eyes were bleeding, and cockroaches were crawling through her long black hair. She floated right up to Samir's face, let out a blood-curdling scream, and lunged. The next morning, the police investigating Mr. Tanaka's murder followed a set of footprints deep into the forest, and that's where they found Samir's body. Now, to really understand what happened out there, we have to look beyond the crime scene and dive into the folklore that created this monster. So, the bekechochin is a very specific kind of yokai called a tsukumogami, which is basically an everyday object that comes to life. But while some of these things just spring into existence after, say, 100 years, the bekechochin's origin is way more violent. It's possessed by an onryo, the vengeful spirit of someone who died with so much rage and hatred that their soul literally latches onto a nearby object. That rage corrupts the lantern, twisting it into a predator with a mouth and a long tongue. Its only purpose is to lure in victims and kill them, usually by reenacting its own violent death on whoever is unlucky enough to light its flame. The police report from that day is, well, it's a grim final chapter. It really cements the Bakachonin's legacy, not just as a spooky story, but as a very real warning, one that's written in blood.
The official report was chillingly simple. Samir's body was covered in deep knife wounds, the exact same kind of wounds that were on the spirit that attacked him. And right there, next to his body, the police found only one piece of evidence: a single white paper lantern. On the books, the case would probably stay an unsolved mystery. But for anyone who knows the old legends, the horrifying conclusion was impossible to ignore. It really makes you wonder, doesn't it? We like to dismiss these things as just stories, urban legends. But when you look at some old, ordinary object, you can't help but ask yourself, what stories might be trapped inside it? What kind of dormant anger is just sitting there, waiting for a single spark of light to be unleashed on the world?